Good morning. We are going to be working with finding equivalent fractions this week in math class. So I'm going to walk you through some different ways to find equivalent fractions. There are three that we're going to be working with this week. So I'm going to start you off this morning with skip counting. When you're skip counting to find equivalent fractions, it sounds simple and it is simple. You're going to start off with a fraction. So in this case this morning, I'm going to start off with 1/2. And what you're generally going to do is, if you're going to use skip counting to find the equivalent fraction, is you think about the fraction in two parts, the numerator, the denominator. So with the numerator, you're going to skip count by whatever number you're given. So in this case, I was given a 1, so I'm just going to count by 1. So I'm going to go 1, 2, 3. And then with the bottom number, then I'm also going to skip count. So I'm going to go 4, 6, and I could keep the pattern going and go out and give you as many equivalent fractions as you want. So what that would look like in pictures then, so if I started off with like 1/2, it would look like this. 2/4, it would look like this. Skipping ahead to the end of my line, the 4/8, again, it would look like this. So if you notice in those pictures, the number of pieces is increasing, but the part of the fraction that you have, it's always the same, which is why it's an equivalent fraction. So if you notice here on the 1/2, it's 2 pieces, you have this much. On this, there's 4 pieces, you still have that same amount. On this last one where it's 8s, there's 8 pieces, it's the most pieces you had, but you still have that same amount. So that's what skip counting would look like. The second way you can do this is by multiplying. And when you multiply a number to find an equivalent, all you have to do, there's just one basic simple rule, is make sure that you multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. You have to treat them fairly, is what we generally say. So if I wanted to find an equivalent fraction and I wanted to multiply to do it, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pick a number to multiply by, and if you notice again, you have to multiply both the numerator and the denominator by the same number. And if you're given a choice of what number to do, I always just keep it simple. I pick a 2, I pick a 5, something that I'm comfortable using to multiply with. So when I do this, then I go ahead, I multiply it out, and I'd have 5/10. So that would be my new equivalent fraction. So those are two ways. All right, the third way you can do it is through division. And we talked a little bit about this the other week. We touched on equivalent fractions. And today we're actually going to be looking at using equivalent fractions to find something called a simplified fraction or simple fraction. It's said different ways. Generally, I like to think of it as simplifying. So that's the word that I use. So here's what this would look like. So we talked about when you're finding equivalent fractions, you want to generally use division when you have larger fractions. Okay? So I'm going to show you an example of this with a larger fraction, and then I'll show you a smaller fraction where you can also do it. So let's say you had the fraction 16/20. Okay? What you want to do when you simplify is you not only want to divide, you want to divide it so you can't divide it any further. Okay? So for example, if I just threw a number in here and just said 2, okay? I can divide 16 by 2, I can divide 20 by 2. So since I can divide them both by 2, if I went ahead and worked that out, I'd have 8/10. However, here's the problem with that. I can take 8/10 and I can keep dividing it down lower, and eventually I'd get 4/5 with this, and I can't divide that any further. What we want to do today is we want to divide it, and we want to be able to get from here, the 16/20, to here, the 4/5, the point where we can't divide it any further, and we want to do it in one step. Okay? So I'm going to walk you through and show you how to do that. So when you have your fraction and you're looking to simplify it, what you actually want to do in order to just simplify it once, divide it down as low as you can, is you're going to make a list. Okay? So I'm going to take my numerator, I'm going to take my denominator, and here's what I want to think about. I want to think about what can I multiply together to get 16, and what can I multiply together to get 20. And what I generally do is I just make my list. I put the largest number at one end, the smallest number at one end, and I just come up with my list. So I know that I have 1 and 16, I have 2 times 8, and I have 4 times 4. With 20, I know I have 1 and 20, I have 2 and 10, and I have 4 and 5. Okay? So now that I have my list, here's what I want. I want to look for the number that they have in common that is the largest number. So if you notice here, I have 1, 2, 4, 1, 2, 4. I could pick the 2, but if you remember back to what I just did a minute ago, when I divided by 2, that didn't get me to my simplest fraction. I had to divide again. So I want to pick the largest factor down here, the largest number I can multiply together to get both 16 and 20. That number is something called the greatest common factor. Okay, it's the greatest common factor. So if you can find that, then simplifying is going to be really easy. So I'm going to take my 16/20ths now, I'm going to divide it by 4. And when I divide it by 4, you're going to see 16 divided by 4 is 4, 20 divided by 4 is 5. So it's going to look just like that. Okay, let's look at one more here really quick that I'm going to show you. And I'll show you where you can actually have smaller fractions. So in this case, I'll do 9/20ths and still be able to simplify it. So even though these are smaller numbers, it's not 16/20ths or 15/30ths or some of the other ones we've done in class where we've used division, this is still one where you can use division and you can still simplify it. And one of the tricky things that we have coming up is that as we get closer and closer to the end of the year and we get closer to taking our end of the year tests, a lot of times on the fraction questions, they will simplify the answers, meaning that you could go through, you could work out the problem, have it done absolutely perfectly the way we've done it in class, and they'll simplify the answer. And so when you look down at the bottom, if you don't simplify the answer, your answer choice isn't going to be there. So fractions like this, they're really important to pay attention to because they look simple and they look kind of harmless, but we still have to take our time and make sure we do the right things with them. So remember, I'm going to put my two numbers down here, my numerator, my denominator, and I'm going to think to myself, what can I multiply together to get 9? What can I multiply together to get 12? And even if you're really good with multiplication, again, I take the time to make the list just because I'd rather take an extra minute to make the list and get the problem right the first time than to just off the top of my head say throw out a number. So I'm still going to make my list. So I have 1, 3, 9, and then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 6, and 12. Those are all the numbers I can think that multiply together to get 12. So again, as I look at them, I want to pick out the greatest number they have in common. So crossing off that 1, cross off the 2, this has a 3, this has a 3. The rest of these they don't have in common. So I'm going to go with the 3. I'm going to divide it out, and when I divide it out, I get 3/4. So, and that would be my final answer. So that is what we are working on this week, equivalent fractions, and I hope this was helpful. Thank you.